You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com.
Well, I hate to leave, really, but I feel like that I'm out of place, living in this community.
Do you feel that there is any way to stop the white people from leaving transitional neighborhoods and going to the suburbs?
Well, no, I don't think so.
A lot of people who are trying to stop the so-called white exodus to the suburbs say that their biggest problem is changing the attitudes of the people. Do you feel that your attitude could be changed to make you want to stay here and live among blacks?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not prejudiced. I just as soon, live here as live anywhere else. But I don't want to be the only white family living here. You see what I mean? I mean, I think it should be 50-50.
Hey, good day to you all. Welcome to Permanent Associates. I'm your host, Randy Perham. And today, hey, got a phenomenal guest. As you can see, the preface there, I'm laying down the foundation, I'm laying down the groundwork for you all, because we're going to get into a very, very great discussion and about white flight. And so, like I said, a very special guest with us today, and most of you are probably familiar with his work, and he has done some tremendous things over the years, and discussing his new book as well. We're going to get into that also. But we have none other than Jack Cashill. He is the author of Untenable: The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities. He is an independent writer, documentary producer, and media consultant. Jack has written for Fortune, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, The Weekly Standard, American Thinker, WND, The American Spectator, The Washington Times, and serves as executive editor for Ingram's, a regional business magazine. Jack has published 15 books under his own name and collaborated discreetly on 20 others. He has produced a score of documentaries for regional PBS and national cable channels. Jack has a PhD from Purdue University in American Studies. He has taught media and literature at Purdue and at Kansas City area universities, and served as a Fulbright lecturer in France. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the some and introducing the others, Mr. Jack Cashill. Good afternoon, sir.
Hey, Randy, thanks for having me. It was an interesting lead-in intro, because in writing my book, and I write from experience because I grew up in America's the poster child for urban dysfunction, Newark, New Jersey. Um,
Yeah.
I I don't talk about the South at all because it's a uh, uh, different scenario altogether from what we experienced. I talk about the Northeast and North Central United States most specifically. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there's some parallels to the South, but it's a little different. And I include the word ethnic in the title because what I rejected then and I reject now is the notion that you can lump all the ethnic groups into the great big ball called white. And then in
Yeah.
the '60s, what they did is then they the media put in that ball, people like Bull Connor and George Wallace, and instead of being like Irish American or Jewish, we're now all white people, right?
Right.
And
Right.
we have to bear the sins of the entire race going back, to the beginning of time, apparently.
To the days of the Vikings.
Yeah, right. And we're actually the first people to come here uh, from the east. The
Mhm.
other people moved west to get here. I'm sorry, everyone else moved east to get here. Our
Yeah.
Native Americans. That's another day. There are no Native Americans. They came from Asia. The Vikings
Hmm.
came from Europe, and we've been hanging on each other ever since.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, and a lot of people don't understand I guess you could say, the anthropology of the world, and how people have
Yeah,
migrated from all over throughout, the dawn of man, since the dawn of man, it just everybody's migrated around everywhere and established cultures, communities, and what have you. And there's so many books out there that people just refuse to read, and so many documentaries people refuse to watch to
right.
to debunk their own biases. And so it's pretty interesting to dig into those kind of things. But I want to ask you, Jack, tell us what was like growing up in your time, prior to or leading into, like, when things start to become integrated and there was that creation of the idea of the Exodus. What was going on during that time?
Well, yeah, and this is kind of a lost chapter of history, Randy. It's a good
Hmm.
question. Uh, my family moved to our block in Newark, New Jersey, in 1953. Uh, when we moved into a triplex at the top of the block. Our triplex was all white. The triplex next to us was all black. I never lived in a neighborhood that wasn't integrated and was integrated from the very beginning. Uh, in 1954, my parents bought a house in the middle of the block, which made us, by the way, as an 1880s fixer-upper that came with a boarder. I mean, there was an older woman living upstairs, and she came with the house. I was the only one of my childhood friends who was a homeowner or lived in their own home. In the 1950 census, which was they release censuses only after 72 years. I don't know why they do it. It's like JFK's brain or something, or UFO reports. But so we have the 1950 census that fortunately came out last year from my research. In 1950, my street, Myrtle Avenue, one block long, had 363 people living on it, uh, immigrants from 14 different countries. And it was an integrated block. The And here's the critical factor: there were 85 households on the block. Of those 85 households, do you know how many had a married male head of household?
All of them.
83. 83 out of 85.
Yeah, almost
That
all.
is the most critical variable in this
Yep.
discussion. These people, and it was a totally working class block.
Hmm.
I read the list of occupations which are listed in the census. Short of lumberjack, there's hardly a blue collar occupation not listed.
Mm.
Uh, Casket maker, right?
Wow.
Rubber molder. Who are these? One guy listed as a huckster. My favorite though was this woman. 30 of the, by the way, 79. There were 79 of the 83 males who were employed. Two were retired, two were unemployed. Of those 79, 30 had working wives working outside the house.
Okay.
Uh, the job that I like best is the one woman who lists her profession as janitress, right? So
Mm.
she embraces both her profession, janitor, and
Hmm.
her sex, janitress,
Janitress.
actresses, actors. They've
Yeah.
run away from their own gender, but not so in 1950. And
Mm.
given that kind of, and it was a dense urban block, but in the streets then, the houses emptied into the street. So people sat on their stoops and their front porches. They didn't retreat into the backyards, mainly because there were no backyards to retreat into. So the life was very communal,
Yeah.
and everyone kept an eye out for everyone else. The main street, which was down the end of our block, was Orange Street, was filled with commerce of every imaginable kind. Virtually all of it mom and pops. There was not an ethnic food you couldn't purchase, within
Yeah.
2 blocks. You can go to Chinese laundries, or you could go to drugstores, Italian shoemakers, Italian barbers, a total
Hmm.
ethnic mix.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, when I talked to people about that time and that place, the word I kept hearing back was idyllic. Now, it's hard to believe that a block that in 1960 would be idyllic, but by 1970, 75 had become untenable. And that's the
Mm.
story of my book, how that happened and why it happened.
That's interesting. I always, jokingly when because I got friends from out east up that way, New Jersey, New York. I say, New Jersey, New York is kind of like New Jersey is more of like an extension of New York. You get the
Yeah,
melting
right.
pot. It's like everybody comes in, through the ports there, and the ships and what have you that's coming in from overseas. And they just kind of just bleed over into New Jersey because there's no more room, or they don't like New York, So it,
Right,
it's,
right.
it's a melting pot, And a lot of people that probably never ventured up east, they probably don't know that. And seeing and I've been in New Jersey. I have former in-laws that was up there, so I spent some time up in New York, in New Jersey, up in Newark, and you're right. You go down the street and you have the little shopping complex, and you can find ethnic foods from all over and all around, and they're right next door to each other. So
That's
you're
right.
you're not gonna miss, wherever you may originally be from. You're not gonna miss it too much because it's right there, at your fingertips as well. And so I found that to be quite nice. And Chicago is like that too. Me born and raised in Chicago, you have the same thing. You could go hop on the CTA and travel up the road a little bit, and you're into Jewtown. That's what it was called back then. Now you can't say it's
Yeah,
Jewtown,
right.
but that's what it was called. You get your Polishes and
Yeah,
kosher dogs and everything else, and then you jump back on that same bus and head down a little further, and now you're in Chinatown. And so
that's right. I mean, right.
that
My
was a
village,
mm-hmm,
I was going to say, my village in Newark it was a little different from all the other villages, partly because ours was more ethnically mixed than many. I mean, the neighborhood immediately to our east was called Little Italy because it
mm-hmm,
was,
yep,
largely Italian, right?
yep,
Uh, and all across Northeast, North Central United States, there were these ethnic villages. Some, like you say, were Jewish. Some were now Asian. Some were Hispanic. Some
mm-hmm,
were largely black, but many of them were mixed.
mixed, yeah,
And I would say one of the defining characteristics of my neighborhood was that it was heavily Catholic. Virtually all the ethnic groups were Catholic,
mm-hmm,
which meant that we weren't dependent on public schools. So
okay,
we all went to the Catholic school, and
yes,
our lives revolved around the Catholic Church, which was right across the street from the neighborhood movie theater. So they were in constant conflict. But other neighborhoods, and this is why I resent the word white here, uh, the Jewish neighborhoods were different in that they were most welcoming of black incomers, newcomers, but they were the first to leave, and they were the first to leave because they depended on public schools. They
mm,
didn't have their own schools, and not only did they depend on public schools, but they depended on excellent public schools. They had very high standards for their children. In Newark, the Jews were economically and academically uh, beyond any other ethnic group.
mm-hmm,
And the notion that we could achieve equity between Jews and, say, the Irish was never going to happen. Their
right,
culture is just much more entrepreneurial and
yeah,
much more educationally oriented.
mm-hmm,
Uh, you know, we could break out. I mean, some of us have, but if we were going to say, if we were waiting for the day when Irish SAT scores and Jewish SAT scores were equal, it was never going to happen unless we pull the Jews down, right? But
right.
uh, that's not going to happen
I,
either.
I laugh because you're absolutely right. And many discussions I've seen and many discussions I partook in the academic sense, in the academic world arena, we talk about these things. It's like you're sitting here trying to conflate that everyone could be on the same playing field or have the same level of academic acumen. It's just not the case. No matter who you are or where you're from, there's just something ingrained in certain cultures that make them outperform other cultures, and we see this more. We've seen this recently, as with the Asian community. With the
Yeah.
whole banning of the affirmative action in college campuses because they were being discriminated against because they perform so well and better than
Right.
other groups. And so, and then you turn to the black community. It's like black people struggle to get into universities because the standards are so high. And just the late Justice Antonin Scalia, he spoke to this. He was like, sometimes you just can't, lower the bar for people, such as this black student at a particular juncture, because you're trying to meet some quota, because you're going to end up hurting that person in the long run because they can't actually compete because it's not their level to compete. They need to just find something that's more comparable to their skill level, and they just go from there. And so now
And
we're seeing
and the
all these
problem
years.
is, yeah,
Hmm.
I was going to say, Randy, the problem is among the black population, it's trending down. And
Yes.
Thomas Sowell talks about this because
Hmm.
he grew up in New York City, and he attended Stuyvesant High School, which remains amazingly, it's a public high school, uh, immune to the pressures to um, throw out test scores. So it's an elite school. You can only test in. Sowell tested in.
Hmm.
When he was this is 70 years ago, but there were a fair number of black students at Stuyvesant High School.
Yeah.
The dominant ethnic group at Stuyvesant were Jews at that
Hmm.
time, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Asians have replaced Jews as in terms of the dominant ethnic
Yeah.
group at Stuyvesant,
Hmm.
but the black numbers continue to decline. And there's no reason for that except for the reason I cited at the top of the page, top of the show, was family formation
Yeah.
and family structure.
Yep.
So if you come from an era, say in circa 1950, 80, 90% of black kids were living with both parents to an age when 25% of black kids are living with both parents, they're just not going to have the same discipline and structure they need
Right.
to succeed at the level that, say, Asians are succeeding at.
Hmm. It's very true. And I also caveat a lot of the affirmative action and the academic culture, you know, things with well, if you're looking at why black kids can't get into these universities and what have you because of the high interest standards or what have you, why not have them just apply to HBCUs? They're being black,
Yeah,
they should just naturally get
right.
accepted. For the simple fact that they're black. Well, no, the HBCUs have higher standards as well. So it's like, well, it's a hilarious argument to just peel the onion back on, and it's just like we just need to understand that there are differences within the many different cultures and ethnic backgrounds, and the I guess you say the tenacity to tackle education in a sense. It's just the
Right.
way it is, and so I don't know. It's crazy to me. But I want to ask you, Jack, what prompted you to write the book now, Untenable? It's I know it's a hot topic book right now, and I want to get your thoughts on what was going on that you decided to write it.
Actually, I wanted to write it, Randy, some time ago. I just had a hard time getting a contract for a book publisher because
Really?
people were wary of the topic. And,
Mm-hmm.
I just got banned by a library, where
T-
they had
tell us
scheduled me to speak and they just invited me. I mean,
tell us
uh,
more about
you
that.
know,
Yeah, tell us about that.
yeah.
What happened there?
This is a bizarre story because I spend most of my summers upstate New York in a
Mm-hmm.
small town called Fredonia. It's on Lake Erie. And the one librarian invited me to come speak at their weekly event because she was always aware of my book. And I said, sure, happy to. It's not, I don't get paid. It's no big deal. And a week later, I get a letter from the director of the library saying, because of recent developments, we've decided that your book uh, is unsuitable for our diverse audiences. And then this is prefaced by his saying, as much as we value a diversity of opinion, your opinions are unsuitable for our diverse
Yeah.
audience. First of all, the town's 98% white. There are no diverse audience. the county gave Trump a 20-point margin of victory. I don't know who he's talking about being offended. But what happened is a few like ideological Karens wrote in. This is
Mm-hmm.
literally what happened. And they said, "How dare you put a book up here by conservative?" And
Yeah.
uh, and the board buckled, and I was disinvited. So, and this is just a month before, by the way, that library will celebrate, like all other libraries,
Mm-hmm.
banned book week. You see,
Yeah.
then they'll
Yeah.
wring their hands about, can you believe this thing? People want us to ban books. Well, we don't. You're doing it on your own.
No,
You
you're doing
know.
it. Yeah, you're doing it on your own. And, you know, it's interesting that you had that issue because down here in Texas, just a couple of weeks ago, Riley Gaines and Kirk Cameron, you know, faced the
Yeah.
same thing. You know, they were supposed to be coming to do their promote their books that they came out with and do a book reading in the library. And of course, Austin being Austin, and the surrounding immediate cities, you know, they
Right.
protested, you know, and then they was disinvited, and then but they were reinvited like a couple of hours before the event was supposed to happen. So it was like,
Yeah.
hey, come into town anyways. We're gonna hide you out, and then we're just gonna put on an event
Right.
anyways, you know. So it was like
And
one of
then
those
what we'll
things.
do is we'll try to suppress your audience turnout in any
Yeah,
case. You know.
exactly, and
And
so
and what it
it's
is,
crazy.
Randy, and you probably see this all the time, is that when I especially I talk to when I just came from family reunion, so it's a rare opportunity I have to
Mm,
speak to liberals, but especially the women. They don't want to hear information that will disturb their worldview.
true,
I mean, they have a
very
very
true.
narrow worldview, and they don't want information coming into that worldview
Hmm.
that is that'll make them question their belief system.
Yeah.
And that's what happened at the Fredonia Library. Even though the book, I've had lots of black readers, and I get great letters from everyone,
Hmm.
and I just did a C-SPAN on Sunday. They've showed my presentation 4 times, and I'm thinking, how is my presentation okay for C-SPAN, but not for the Fredonia Library? Um,
Wow.
so
That's a
I don't know.
yeah.
And I've also gotten a lot of emails from liberals who saw the presentation, and it put them in a quandary because they were saying to me, "Well, your experience is exactly like mine." And then they will dig into my background, but they'll say, "You guys, the guy who wrote the book on TWA Flight 800, you're a conspiracy theorist." Blah blah. Yeah, stop this.
Yeah.
Open your eyes, take the red pill, and begin to see
Hmm.
what happened.
What happened? Yeah.
And let me just tell you about the title of the book because that speaks to the thesis of the book very clearly.
Hmm.
Last spring, I was doing research. I met with a bunch of my friends who I grew up with. And the average person who was exiled from Newark now lives about 60 miles away because the good suburbs were too expensive. So the working class people had to go, live in these instant suburbs, pulled out of New Jersey's Pine Barrens. And
Hmm.
I said to this guy, Artie, and he's a Democrat. Most guys turn Republican under this pressure. I said, why did you finally leave the block? I mean, you were the last one of our friends to leave our block in Newark. And he said, well, Jack, it became untenable. And I said, Artie, what do you mean by untenable? He said, well, when your mother gets mugged for the second time, that's untenable. When your home gets invaded for the second time, that's untenable. And what was untenable for Artie was untenable for millions of other people across America, white, black, Asian, Hispanic. And I cite in the book several stories of black people who left
Hmm.
under almost identical circumstances. In Newark, one was the Whitney Houston's parents.
Yeah.
Whitney Houston were born in the same hospital. I'm afraid that was one of us became more famous than the other. But then again, one of us is still alive and the other isn't.
Yeah.
Um, Sister Houston, Whitney's mom, her parents came up in that earlier wave of the Great Migration. When they came to Newark in the 30s, they came to work. They did not expect anyone to hand them anything because no one was prepared to hand them anything.
Hmm.
The understanding is you came to the North for better jobs, better opportunity.
Opportunity. Yeah.
Her father raised 8 children on his salaries of working in a foundry. And I'm sure he worked very hard for a living. Mother was ill and she didn't work outside the home, but she was insisted on three things: God, family, music. So they were a God fearing, loving family. The father, Whitney's father, would take her, I mean, not Whitney's grandfather, would take his wife, carry her 3 flights downstairs, put her in a wheelchair, wheel her to church, take her to church, wheel her back, carry her up 3 flights of stairs, and raise 8 children at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But when Whitney then marries John Huston, who lived in my neighborhood, and they have Whitney and two other children. In 1966 or 7, Sissy Houston, Whitney's mom, says, I used to love our little village, but the crime and the drugs is rampant now. This is getting out of control. And then after the riots in 1967, she says to her husband, John, we've got to get out of here. We can't stay in Newark any longer.
Yeah.
3 years later, they do what any responsible parent would do who could do it. They move to the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, Kanye West's mother did the same thing in your native Chicago. She
Mm-hmm.
lived in South Shore. Kanye gets mugged. He gets his bicycle tire slashed, and he comes home, tells Donda, his mother, and she says, call it black flight, call it whatever. We're out of here.
Yeah.
This is what people do when they're put under duress.
Mm-hmm.
Only white people, however, get shamed for doing it. And that's what really drove me to write this book. I wanted to vindicate my parents' generation. They've lived under this burden for years, and it's unfair.
You're right. You're absolutely right about that. It's a strange conundrum to me that and it's just as the many examples that you gave, and I fit the same bill. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and it got like just so crazy that my mom said, "Okay, enough is enough." We moved out to Maywood, Illinois, which is only about 20-minute drive away, but nonetheless, it
Right,
was a quieter, smaller community. We moved out that way. I finished elementary school, and then I relocated again out to the south suburbs of Chicago, and it was much further away. It was about an hour away, and
yeah,
went to high school out there. And it was although it was a mixed community, it was predominantly black, but it was an affluent community. So the
right,
crime was like really like breaking news of the century if something happened
right,
out
right,
there.
right,
It just didn't happen. So it was that same thing, and you saw many other ethnic groups that Hispanics, Asians, Italians, and what have you. They were starting to slowly trickle their way out into these different suburbs because they were like, I gotta get ready for Chicago. It's gotten crazy. The crime and the drugs, gang activity, and everything else was on a surge, and this is the late '90s. So
right.
it was just one of those times, and for white people, they were castigated as the evil, racist people that were just trying to get away from all black people, and it was just like, well, they're moving into communities where there's other black people. So where are we getting this idea that they're that they're racist? And so
No, right,
no
and
one could ever answer that directly. They're just like, well, they shouldn't moved away. It's like what?
right, the way they answer that, Randy, is to shut down conversation.
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I mean, what dawned on me bizarrely is that when I started writing this book, is that no one had ever literally. I mean, I may exaggerate a little bit, but no book that I know of, no book that I could find, did the people talking about white flight interview the people who fled and asked them why, right? Um, there was an
That's
op-ed
a
in the
good
New
point.
York Times by a woman named Leah Bustan, professor at Princeton. She writes this book about white flight, uh, and she says, so was it racism or was it just economics and racism? And then she says, she concludes the op-ed by saying, what makes my job difficult is that very few people left accounts of why they left. And she said, I think if you ask them, most of them tell you why. Uh-huh.
Hmm.
Hey,
Yeah.
Leah, I just talked to 50 people who told me exactly why they left.
Hmm.
And they were in very specific, and they almost related around incidents involving crime, schools, or busing, crazy busing, where
The
you
busing
put your kid on
policies.
a bus into a neighborhood an hour away, and you have no control over what's happening to them on the way there and back.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so those are the variables. Economics, no, people weren't competing for jobs. That wasn't the issue. It was never the issue. It was about, and yeah, it was some racism. You've I'm sure experienced a little bit in your life, Randy,
Mm-hmm.
but not enough for people to uproot themselves
Right.
from neighborhoods they loved. That was
You're
not the main factor.
yeah, you're right. It wasn't the to me. It was from what I've seen over the years, over the last couple of decades. That wasn't the sole motivating factor. Sure, there are some families that say, okay, we're getting away from the Hispanics. They're coming in, so we're going to move further away. We're going to get away from the black people. They're moving. They're coming in. Sure, there was some of that, and we I think we can all acknowledge that did occur. Somewhere around America, but largely, I would say, and I'm sure you would agree here too, Mr. Cashill, that assimilation is mostly desired when one moves anywhere. They kind of almost subconsciously seek out likeness of a community. They're like,
Right,
okay, I'm a black person, so I'm gonna look for a black community to move into. I'm not gonna necessarily go hunt down an Asian community and move into it. It's just
right.
I never seen that happen. And I'm
No,
been in the military 20 plus years, and I lived all over the world almost, and I never thought to say, okay, wherever I'm gonna move to, I'm gonna look for all the black people to move, to move into that housing division. It just didn't happen. It was
right,
like I'm moving where there's availability, so I can get my family settled and get ready for work tomorrow. that was the first and
right.
foremost thing on my mind. So
Sure.
so I think the we need to speak to the converse to the upper echelons of the conversation here is that most people when they do move they look to assimilate into such communities versus they're looking to get away from those communities. There's a mixture there, and so for
There is,
whites,
and
yep. Go ahead.
no, you're absolutely right, and what I think happened, just from my experience
Hmm.
and looking at my block, when my mother grew up, she wasn't allowed to play with Italians, right?
Mm.
She's our family's Irish. Uh,
Oh,
the
okay.
Germans probably weren't allowed to play with the Irish when the Irish came to Newark, right? So that's
Yeah,
probably the way it worked.
yeah.
But by the 1950s, it seemed to me that blacks were on the verge of becoming just another ethnic group in a city like Newark. There were, I had black friends. I always had black friends. I had black neighbors. I mean, it wasn't an issue. I mean, you
Mm.
were aware that they were black, but you're aware that your Italian friends were Italian. You
Yeah.
know, and you go at you attack each other on racial ethnic grounds all the time.
Oh
You
yeah,
were actually
those.
you were a lot more sensitive for attacking black people on racial grounds, but yeah, Irish and Italians would go at it all the time. And
Hmm.
I was looking at my grade school eighth grade graduation yearbook, where half of the autograph book where they write in are like ethnic slurs. I mean, really, it's true.
Oh, I
In
can
fact,
imagine.
one guy, this black guy, writes in an ethnic slur. He says like something like "roses are red, violets are blue." Uh, uh, I'm not a Guinea, and neither are you. Okay, well, we have that in common. Neither of us Italian, right?
Hmm.
So, but
Yeah.
but in the 60s, that all began to change for two reasons. One is there's the radicalization of the black youth, and the problem was that there was a greater and greater percentage of black youth who were uh, fatherless and rootless and estranged from the community, and
Hmm.
not on any upwardly mobile path.
Yeah.
So that combination in Newark was literally deadly because it resulted in a riot. I mean, we had a major riot in 1967, which really drove population away, including Whitney Houston's mom,
Mm.
and it ended that minor kind of quasi golden era in which it was possible for everyone to live together without being on each other's cases all the time.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah, it was kind of the same thing in Chicago on the west side there. In the late '80s, kind of going into the '90s, it was you wake up, you go outside to play on a Saturday morning after you watch all your Saturday morning cartoons and eat your two
Right,
bowls of cereal. You go outside to
right, of
play
course,
and you had a mixed neighborhood. You had the white
right,
kids, the black kids, the Hispanic kids that where I was at, anyways. And we played football in the street. We played basketball, and we do different things. We would ride our bikes up to the park and get into fights with each other and come back home and call it a day. And then all of a sudden, you wake up the following Saturday and it was a mass exodus. It seemed like they discovered that there was a new housing complex somewhere, and everybody just moved away, and it was just like the remaining poor black kids and a couple of
Right.
Hispanic kids that was remaining in the neighborhood. And it was like, man, where did everybody go? And they moved. So, and then the houses got boarded up, and the apartments got boarded up, and so the community became very, very destituted, and just ran down because of the simple
Right.
fact that the pride of having multicultural backgrounds and families in that community went away, and it became a monogamous um, neighborhood, and no one had any apathy, or well, everyone was apathetic to doing
Right.
anything better. They was just like, yeah,
No,
it is
right.
what
I
it
mean,
is.
if the community, yeah, you're right. If the community loses its sense of harmony and that organic
Mm-hmm.
quality of pulling together, it can disintegrate quickly.
Yes.
And like I say, my neighborhood was held together. The Catholic Church school was a huge factor in the whole neighborhood together. So it took a lot of crime, a lot of violence, a lot of disorder to pull that neighborhood down. One thing that almost never talked about is the effects of the 1924 Immigration Restriction Act. And a lot of people on the right think that's a good thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
incline to disagree. In 1924, Congress basically shut down immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe to a trickle. That was the Italians, Jews, Poles,
Mm-hmm.
Lithuanians, etc.
Right. Right.
And so, what did not slow down was the immigration from the south to the north, the Great Migration.
Mm-hmm.
So, in up until 1924, each of these groups was coming in a stream. All these streams were coming in, so there was no identification of poverty with any given race because or with the hard, the ditch digging kind of jobs.
Yeah.
Italians were doing it, Irish were doing it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Blacks were doing it. But after 1924, and as the only people moving into the center of the city where the lower income housing was and where the crappier jobs were, but there were jobs,
Yeah.
were black people.
Mm-hmm.
Other than a few, the immigration streams in Newark, the major ones are Jewish, Italian, Irish, had all but dried up.
Yeah.
So, and that did another thing too, is that the black population, although statistically equal to the other populations, was younger, less educated, and less assimilated into urban life.
Mm-hmm.
So it created a division that had not really been there before.
Yeah.
It started widening the perception gap between blacks and all other ethnic groups. And
Right.
then all the other ethnic groups were compressed by the media and the government into white. All of a sudden, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we're white now, right? And,
Yeah, even
so
Asians now are
yeah,
considered
right,
white. It's like what the fuck.
yeah, yeah, right,
Yeah, yeah,
right,
it's
right,
it's crazy. And you're absolutely right about that because yeah, like I said, moving around the country over the years and moving into different communities, you'll see these different dynamics unfold. And one thing that I took notice was that how when you go into a, say, I just use examples, St. Louis, Missouri. When I lived in
right,
Missouri back in the early 2000s, it was, you go to St. Louis, you had South St. Louis was relatively nice. Central St. Louis was like, yeah, you might not want to be down
right.
here, past 6 p.m. And then you go North St. Louis, and it was relatively okay again. So you're right. It was like, it seemed like it was a vacuum that went to the center of the
That's right.
city, and that was like the most destituted areas of that whole city. And you find it more commonly so around like the skirts of the downtown area, and so I would go up to St. Louis. It was like an hour and some change drive up there, and go up to St. Louis for various events and things, and I would go with a couple of other black friends. We would go up there and hang out, party, and what have you, and they would say, "Man, I can't go into this part of town.
Yeah, right.
Let's go find some white clubs,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or some little Latino clubs and go hang out there instead because we can't. I can't do it. No, I don't want to do. And I would laugh and I was like, okay, that's a good point. All right, because the black clubs seemed a little bit more rambunctious than the other clubs, and it was just like you might end up in a body bag by the end of the night
Yeah,
versus the
right. I
white.
mean, they have that potential.
Yes,
I
and
was
so.
one St. Louis story because
Hmm.
I live in Kansas City now, Randy, and
Okay, yep,
I had
down the road.
some years ago when I was working in advertising and marketing, one of my clients was the St. Louis University Medical Center, and we had as the guy I interacted with was this gay liberal guy, and uh, so we were shot something downtown St. Louis, and we're going around to do is they're different. They have different hospitals in around the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
So he said, "Okay, now we're going to go to East St. Louis, right?" And one of my cameramen said, "East St. Louis,"
East, East,
so
East. You
and
mean
then
Chicago?
and East St. Louis is that's another can of worms over there,
Yeah.
and and then our client assured us, "No," he goes, "East St. Louis is perfectly fine. There's nothing to be afraid of over there." Blah blah blah. He gives us a lecture. He leaves 10 minutes before us because we're packing up our equipment. We follow him over to East St. Louis. By the time we got there, he'd been mugged. and
Oh wow.
and we had to really suppress. He's my client. I can't laugh about this, but it was at the time we were just uh, after the lecture we got. It was semi
Yeah.
comical.
Yep. That happens. Yeah, and
But
I
now,
totally get it.
what became untenable were the unfortunately the inner cities of every city
True.
in America.
Unfortunately, it's
And
true.
the real tragedy is Randy is that people are afraid to address the issue.
Hmm.
They're afraid to talk about what the problem was, and in a nutshell, to me, it was the welfare induced breakdown of the family.
Hmm.
So, in by the mid '60s, the percentage of black kids living out without a father is 25%, and that's when Daniel Patrick Moynihan writes his famous report saying, if this continues, as a group will never achieve equity because they can't compete with groups which family, 98, 90% of kids with fathers.
Yeah.
Well, by 2008, that number had more than doubled to like 60%. Barack Obama speaks about it when he's running for president.
Hmm.
And he was in the ideal position to address this issue because he's a good father himself. He's a good model, to black kids, black families. And he gives a talk on Father's Day in Chicago. And he says, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, the real problem in our community is the absence of fathers in the home. Too
Hmm.
many men acting like boys, too many men abandoning their responsibilities.
Yep.
And then he starts going through the statistics. These are statistics that have nothing to do with race, just with fatherlessness.
Right.
5 times more likely to drop out of school, 10 times more likely to commit crimes, 20 times more likely to end up in prison.
Hmm.
That's the speech he needed to be given. He needed to use that bully pulpit to drive this fact home.
Hmm.
He shouldn't have been talking about systemic racism. He should have been talking about family formation, community togetherness.
Yep.
3 weeks
Agreed.
after he gives that talk, Jesse Jackson's picked up on a hot mic saying, Barack Obama, he talking down to black people. I want to cut his nuts out.
Hmm.
Bam,
Yeah.
end of that conversation.
Yep.
And then the
It's
progressive white community rallied behind Jesse Jackson
of course.
because they wanted systemic racism to be the explanation for everything too. Because
The
a
focal
lot of
point.
them depended, their livelihoods depended on that being
Yes.
the cause. That way they can continue to give themselves salaries for solving a problem that
But they
under their
create.
that they created exactly
Yeah.
right, and that is
It's
unsolvable by
hmm.
their own lights, right?
Exactly. It is, and
And that's where we are today,
Jack. That
untenable.
is a you're right. That is a whole nother show. That
Yeah,
I can we could get into that. We could peel the onion, the oranges, and the apples on that one. That is a yes. That wow. You're absolutely right, and it speaks. What's been going on over the last 60 years in urban America, and I'll say urban America because it is all the major cities, throughout the United
right.
States for the last 60 years, which has been under all Democrat rule. And so
Right.
the policies and the mindset, you name it. It shows that there's been a gradual devolution that has taken place in these cities, and no one wants to address the reasons why. They just look at it and say, now it's white supremacy, and it's like, but there's no white people there.
Right.
It's like
No, no,
don't
white
forget, they
people.
moved out in the 70s, in the 60s. They moved out, so it's all black people. So you can't say it's white supremacy. So what else is it? And we don't want to have that conversation, and it's just. I don't know where we're gonna go with that in the future.
And in the woker cities,
Hmm.
the cities with minimal black populations, they're destroying themselves. Cities like San
Yes,
Francisco and Portland, Seattle, their
yes,
black populations are minimal, but the woke policies are such that it's like they're importing self-destruction, right?
yes.
Gosh, we
Yes.
don't have any ghetto here, so let's import homeless people.
Hmm.
Let's make ourselves a sanctuary city for illegal aliens, or
Yeah.
a sanctuary city for trans activists, and you get Portland. You
Hmm.
know,
That's true.
I I visited a black friend in Portland 10 years ago. He's living there. He's since moved. He had enough. And I remember walking through the airport with him. He met me at the airport, and I said to him, I said, Greg, this is the whitest airport I've ever been in. There are no black people here. He goes, no. He goes, so he was treated like a prince because he was like special. It's like a visitor from a foreign country. But so Portland, in that 10 years since, has destroyed itself without
Hmm.
just by listening to the gods of wokeness about
Yeah.
how a city should function.
Hmm.
It's really a tragedy and a shame, and it doesn't
Yeah.
need to happen.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I got a buddy up in Minneapolis, up in Minnesota.
Huh.
Same thing, same thing.
So, yeah,
And him and his family, they ended up moving out of the city. It was just like, yeah, no, we're done with this. So
yeah, total
it sucks.
self-destruction.
It is. It's sad to see, but what can we do? Jack, where final thoughts, sir. I leave you the last word, and tell us where we can follow you and support you.
Sure. I would say the best place is just go to my website, which is cashill.com, CASHILL.com. The book is called Untenable. I would recommend you get it through Amazon because um, that's the way publishers keep score nowadays. So, Untenable, the true story of white ethnic flight from America's cities. It's my 17th book and my best, most personal, and it's getting wonderful. It's a large part of memoir, so it's a very readable book. It's not crammed with needless statistics and whatnot, and it's kind of upbeat in its own odd way. I remain an optimist about all these things. I don't know why, but
Hmm.
if I'm not an optimist, why get out of bed in the morning? Why
Yeah,
why continue to tackle the demons? And Randy, thanks for all the good work you do, and keep it up. And
absolutely.
thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and absolutely look forward to having you back on again so we can do some deep dives on those
Now I
all
want to
those
hear
stuff.
about West Side of Chicago.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Take care. God bless. Be safe.
Oh, okay, you take care. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Jack Cashill. Hey, great, phenomenal conversation. I loved it. And I wish it was days like this where my show was like 2-3 hours long, and we could have probably kept it going and got into some real stuff. But nonetheless, I have him back on again pretty soon here, and we get into it. But folks, I'm gonna jump to a quick commercial break, pay some bills, and catch you in a few minutes. So keep it locked right here. See you in a couple. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com.
America's under attack, and they're all around us. I'm talking about liberal Democrats, and they're out to destroy everything that we've worked so hard for. Mammoth Nation's here to fight for you. You only get one vote, so let's join forces. We support conservative lawmakers and the causes you hold so dearly. We stand behind our police, veterans, the Second Amendment, and much more. We need your help, so join today.
I had just recently gotten divorced, so I was a single parent, but still wanted to keep my boys' lives as normal as possible. So trying to keep up with something two people were doing and now one person in a different city new job, new schools. The Thrive really made my transition, which was a major transition, it really made it a lot easier and it made it a lot smoother for my boys. And I know that they're grateful for it. My 10-year-old, he always says, Mom, you've got to thrive out loud. Did you take your Thrive? And my oldest always tells me, like, you know, you're kind of cool, Mom. Like, you know, you don't get it. You're not cranky like you used to be. Like, Thrive really helped me to adjust to something that some people don't really get back on track from.
You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com. Hey, before I forget and jump out of here, you know, as always, on Friday, it's Red Friday. It's a time we take to thank our men and women who have served our nation around the world, making their sacrifices and commitments in protecting our freedoms, our Constitution, our liberties, and our way of life. We thank you, we salute you, and we wish you nothing but a best and safe journey back home to your friends, family, and loved ones. Folks, this conversation with Mr. Jack Cashill, once again, you go to cashill.com and check out the website, check out the various pieces of work, books, documentaries, and everything else that you might be interested in. Check it out there. Go to amazon.com and pick up the book Untenable, and it's the true story of white ethnic flight from American City. I was about to chop that whole title up, but you can go to amazon.com and pick that up and check it out. And like I said, the conversation was great because we nailed some things, some truths out there. There's been many mixed communities, throughout the country over the decades, right? There's been many that left because it became, as they say, as he said, untenable, and that was because of the degradation of the community, and it may not necessarily have been by one ethnic group or another. It's just been maybe because of economic situations, shift in mentality. Kids growing up and decided to be a little bit more destructive than the previous set of kids that lived there. There's many different reasons as to why, people decide to move away. And hell, you might want to just move away because you're tired of living in that community. You're just like, okay, I lived here for 20 some odd years, and it's time for me to just see something else for a change. That happens too, and that's one of the things that you kind of we kind of like just ignore, as a factor of things, and we also don't want to speak to the ideas of why ethnic groups look to move into communities that are like them. The assimilation. We don't want to talk about that. We just look at focus on one group, and that's white people that move away. And it's like, why are you mad that a white person moved away? It's like, especially if you're a minority, ethnic minority. Why are you mad about that? Why are you labeling them as racist? It's like you need them there or something. I don't know, but it's just weird to me. And then we didn't get a chance, and I'm gonna have to bring them back on for this part of the conversation. Like I said, I would like to have them back on. We could dig into a lot of stuff here, but the redlining, gentrification, blockbusting, these are not relegated efforts to just black communities. And a lot of people that throw these buzzwords around, they try to just apply them to just to black, happening to just black communities. This is happening to even white communities, and to Asians, and to Hispanics, and to Italians, and to Muslim communities. It happens to everyone. It just depends on how much spotlight they're going to get behind it in the media. And so it goes on all the time, and it's just strange to me how so many of these media heads, they push these narratives without telling the whole story. But like I said, we're gonna get into it in another time, and I think I just planted some seeds for you all to kind of just do some digging on your own, and look at the realities of America and what's been going on in various cities around the country. particularly the major cities. He touched on Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Minneapolis, and we also touched on New York, New Jersey, not New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey, Atlanta. It's just so many different cities around the country. Chicago, Detroit, they all been through their own disastrous, if you will, times for various reasons. Folks, we'll see you all on Monday. God willing, God bless, be safe. Take care. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.tecntv.com.